Hey folks, this is part 5 of my G1 Transformers, Pre-Transformers, and GoBots collection series. So sit back and relax and let's get right into this. Hey guys, M here from Transformers and Video Games, and welcome back to the channel. After nearly 2 years, I've finally gotten around to recording part 5 of my G1 Transformers, Pre-Transformers, and GoBots collection series. Before we get started, I just wanted to dedicate this video to 3 other Transformers YouTubers. First, we have the Collector 75. His legendary Transformers collection and reviews inspired me to start collecting G1 Transformers again as an adult collector over 10 years ago. Then we have Valco4084, who's got an amazing G1 Transformers collection and some jaw-dropping collection videos on YouTube. And last but not least, we have Toys R Russ, who's a newer Transformers-related YouTuber that I had the privilege of connecting with earlier this year. He's got a collection that's so incredible, it's got to be seen to be believed. I'm going to link all 3 of these channels in the description, so be sure to check them out and subscribe if you like what you see. Now on with the video. Okay, so let's start off by taking a look at my Hasbro G1 Dinobots. Now, as many of you already know, I'm a Canadian Transformers collector, so you'll notice on the shelf that many of my boxed G1 figures are the bilingual Canadian variants. One thing that I find really interesting about Canadian Transformers is that in some cases the characters' English and French names are identical, and in other cases, Hasbro came up with something entirely different for the French names. Of all the boxed G1 Dinobots that I have in my collection, I think the most difficult one for me to find was probably G1 Swoop. Sadly, I don't think a lot of them survived the 80s. Now, keep in mind that back then, very few people were thinking of Transformers as any sort of an investment, so many of them would have seen a lot of rough play, and very few people would have kept their figures mint in box or mint in sealed box. Having said that, if I'm not mistaken, our friends in the UK didn't even get a release of G1 Swoop, which is really unfortunate. Speaking of Canadian variants, I'm lucky enough to have the harder-to-find, anime-accurate Canadian version of G1 Slag. This is the one with a red face, white thighs, and a red rocket launcher. Now, just for the record, not every Canadian Slag has these color differences. Many of them are identical to the standard worldwide release of the figure, so if you're a variant collector, just be aware of that. I've always wondered why there was a different variant of the figure in the first place, but I'm certainly not complaining. It's become a very cool part of Transformers history. Now, speaking of interesting variants, how many of you have heard of the prehistory animal Dinobots? These were very unusual, vintage KO versions of the figures. I suppose they tried to make them different enough to sidestep copyright laws at the time, so Grimlock had large front fangs and a metal tongue, Sludge had a head like a pterodactyl and large wings, Snarl had an alligator's head, and Slag had antlers in dinosaur mode, and white thighs and a yellow head and chest in robot mode. These are actually some of my favorite KO figures that have ever been produced. Over on the right, we have my pre-Transformers Takara Microchange MC06 watch Robo. I think just about everyone had a version of this watch back in the day. I've actually reviewed this one along with the silver chrome version on my channel, if you have any interest in checking either of them out. Then next to that, we have the 1986 Series 3 Autobot Triple-Changers. My favorite one has always been Sandstorm, and my least favorite one has always been Broadside, but let me know in the comments section which one you like the best. Next, we have a few KO Diaclone Dinobots under the Ancient Animal and Dinosaur Robot branding. I say KO Diaclone because if you look at the packaging, it's almost identical to the Takara pre-Transformers version of the Dinosaur Robo figures, and looks nothing like the G1 Dinobot packaging. Here we've got some Series 2 and 3 Decepticon Triple-Changers. My favorite has always been Blitzwing. G1 Octane has a certain charm to it, but it's always been my least favorite of the 3. The airplane mode is pretty cool, but the truck mode is kind of lazy in my opinion. Now, for anyone who's a fan of Astro Train, there was actually a Walmart G1 reissue of it back in 2020, so don't be fooled by this one if you're looking for a vintage specimen of the figure. Pay close attention to the dates and other details on the box and on the figure itself. On this shelf, I have an official Takara pre-Transformers version of Slag and of Grimlock. You'll notice the little picture of a Diaclone driver on both boxes. These little guys were meant to pilot the Dinosaur Robo and other early Transformers figures, but this gimmick was dropped when the figures were rebranded as Transformers and released worldwide by Hasbro. Take a close look at your early G1 Autobot figures. Many of these still have a little seat or compartment for a Diaclone driver, just in case you were ever wondering why it's there. Here we've got a mint and sealed box specimen of G1 Repugnus that I was lucky enough to find for a decent price at TFCon here in Canada a number of years ago when it was still a relatively obscure character. I think most people have heard of it now thanks to the Titans Return Amazon exclusive version of the figure. Next here's Rodimus Prime and Wreck-Gar. Both of them have original price tags on them from the same store and show a regular price of $15.95 and a sale price of what would appear to be $14.92. I went through a phase a number of years ago of carefully removing price tags from my vintage figures, but that's something that I regret doing now, unless the price tag is damaged or in a really bad place on the packaging. People can obviously do whatever they want with their own figures, but for me, keeping the price tag intact helps preserve the history of the figures. Here are some of my Super GoBots. Now, I know that these aren't popular with most Transformers collectors, but back in the 80s, I loved these almost as much as I loved the Transformers. I recognize that not every design is fantastic, but there are some classic figures here that are every bit as good as the Transformers were. For example, Leader 1 and Psykill are great figures that have strong alt modes and very respectable robot modes as well. If we're comparing apples with apples, Super GoBots Psykill stacks up very well against G1 Wreck-Gar and even has a stronger motorcycle mode, in my humble opinion. Let me know if you agree or disagree with me in the comments section. These are some of my boxed, regular-sized Machine Robo figures, which later became GoBots when they were released in North America. I'm very happy to see that Action Toys produced their own modern versions of a number of these figures. Unfortunately for me, I missed the boat on getting these when they were first available for pre-order, and I refused to pay aftermarket prices on them. Having said that, I'm just happy that these figures are starting to get the respect that they deserve, even if it did take over 30 years for it to happen. A lot of modern Transformers collectors were introduced to the Headmasters characters and subline of the Transformers with the Titans Return line. Here we've got Hardhead and Highbrow, which barely fit on my shelf. My box specimen of Highbrow is actually the only one I've ever come across as an adult collector. I find that the deeper you go into the G1 line, the more uncommon and unfortunately the pricier these figures start to get. This is the GoBots Puzzler gift set, which is Tonka's answer to the Stunticons, also known as G1 Dinosaur. One thing to consider before you tell me that there's no comparison between these two combiners is the fact that the Puzzler doesn't require any additional parts in order for it to combine. With Dinosaur, you need to plug in a new head, fists, feet, and chest plate in order to complete the transformation. The Puzzler's combined mode may not be as strong as Dinosaur's, but everything that you need for the figure to combine is built right into the vehicles, so there's no parts forming involved whatsoever. Thanks to the Titans Return and most recently the Earthrise Transformers lines, most people are familiar with the Decepticon clones Pounce and Wingspan. This is a mint and sealed box set that I won on eBay a number of years ago when I was at the height of my vintage G1 Transformers collecting. Here's G1 Perceptor, who I think is actually an underappreciated vintage Autobot figure. It's actually a working microscope, albeit a very low-powered one. He's got a great robot mode, and he even has a tank mode, which most people don't talk about, probably since it was never featured on the 1980s Sunbow G1 animation series. Okay guys, that's it for part 5 of my G1 Transformers, Pre-Transformers, and GoBots collection series. Thank you very much for checking out the video. Here's a quick scan of my shelf from top to bottom for anyone who's interested. Thanks again for watching, everyone. Take care.